Dr. Lee Scott Theisen, speaking on deciding what to interpret.
Deciding what to interpret is something like Monopoly. The results are that you may pass to go, or you may go directly to jail. That is, just another bunch of artifacts on display. A museum's interpretive programs are the institution's direct link to the public, and thus they are critical to the public's perception of the institution, its collections, and its professionalism. They are the major basis for the goodwill of the public and community, and thus sources of financial support. The problem with most interpretive programs is that they are passive, not active when it comes to talking to the public. This is true whether it is an exhibit or a historic home. One of the major problems in interpretation is that all too often curators write for curators, not for the public. In addition, many museums assume an inherent right to exist, a right they don't have. When they approach interpretation, it is all too often done with too little planning and too little thought, and thus becomes display, not interpretation. An exhibit should be an active medium, an environment, not just a display. A museum becomes the way it is used. You can have an excellent museum with very few or no collections. It is what you do with what you have, your purpose, that makes a museum. First of all, you must decide what you intend to exhibit and how you will exhibit it. Good interpretation requires not only a beginning, but a well-planned and executed carry-through to completion. Second, ask who the interpretation is for and how the exhibit or program will be planned, designed, and administered. Also ask what other community and institutional benefits can be derived from the exhibit. And there are other questions to consider. We need to ask who we are currently reaching and how long we want an ongoing exhibit for the purpose we have decided on. Furthermore, you also have to address the physical nature of your facility. Do you have exhibit space? What interpretive centers do you have? How large are they? What are the physical problems of your space? All of this affects your decision on what to interpret. Then ask how you capture the visitors and how you make them look at what you want them to see. And here you return to your basic. First, you have to decide what you will interpret. A museum is a collection of things which are assembled for a specific purpose. What is its purpose? What are the magnets of your collection? Find them and do as shopping centers do, and orient them so you will draw your visitors to other collections. Do you use your objects like this? The major elements in an exhibit are its contents, its design, and its interpretation. The most important of these is the content. It is the why we exhibit, and the central point of beginning is the artifact. When it comes to design and interpretation, there is no conflict between providing the layman with what he wants to see and serving scholarship. Yet somehow, many museum staffs have developed a self-defeating idea that they cannot attract and interest the public and yet remain educational. They preserve an arcane idea that a museum is a reliquary of artifacts, a monastic atmosphere devoted to those few that understand them. Where did they ever acquire such self-defeating notions, particularly in a day where electronics constantly changes the parameters of both expectations and possibility? If a museum is collecting important objects to begin with, then through its exhibits, it can serve learning at several levels, from the casual visitor to the scholar. If they do not, then the staff is not thinking through its interpretation. It is simply displaying. Your collections policy tells you what kind of museum you are, what your geographic range is, what your period of time is. Do you have a real collections policy? That is, one that is thought out, written down, and regularly reviewed. In this policy, you should have the parameters of what to interpret. Your scope of collection sets your limits, specifies the place, time, and subject to which your collections relate, and also considers the use to which they will be put. These collections should rate to the capabilities of the museum for their presentations, to their potential use for research, to documentation and interpretation. But this scope of collections definition should be revised whenever changed conditions clearly alter needs and purposes. Now, this doesn't mean your collections are all you interpret. However, in reviewing your collections to know what you have, also learn what other objects and films and programs and demonstrations you need to do an interpretation. If you do not have the objects, they will need to be acquired. And there may be objects on your list which cannot be immediately acquired. For these desirable but currently unobtainable artifacts, the museum needs a long-range want list, which should be part of your strategic long-range interpretive planning. This should be compiled at the time of exhibit planning and used in a continuous acquisition program. In preparing this list, review all the kinds of objects involved in your story. Be hard-headed, but do not be bound rigidly by the display space presently available, or by the fact that you do not know where the artifacts are, or by narrow collecting definitions. Each artifact has an educational and communicative function. In planning your interpretation, use the best available example of the right object to accomplish your interpretive purpose. Your artifacts should be of high quality in terms of their particular interpretive functions. In some cases, they should be like new. In others, they should be in the condition of everyday use. But this is something that needs to be decided as you prepare your script and reflect on your interpretation. Should this object be authentic, or should it be a facsimile? In most cases, use the original item. In other cases, consider whether exposure will damage the original, and when it is unique and rare or better protected somewhere else, then make that decision. But if you use a facsimile, make it clear that it is a facsimile. Now, factors which must be considered with any interpretation are, first, what you want to say. Second, can it be said? Third, what you have or need to say it with. Fourth, what is the proper mode to say or interpret it in? Fifth, what your schedule is. And sixth, what your budget is. The schedule will be determined by your staff, by your budget, by other considerations. The key is careful planning. Poor planning can result in many problems, including large expenses downstream. And remember, your design is part of your interpretation. Design is a vehicle of communications. Now, a museum should also have a definition of its exhibit philosophy. These guidelines will permit all participants in exhibits to know exactly why, how, and toward what end the exhibit is being made, and how it fits in the overall exhibit program. They will be able to follow a plan that incorporates the operations philosophy of why and how it is a place of public education. An idea for an exhibit can be proposed and even accepted without the total implications being realized. The person originating the proposal in a pre-planning worksheet should think of 1, the subject, 2, the source of material, 3, possible dates and location within the museum, 4th, funding sources, 5th, estimated cost, 6th, additional events, and 7, educational and public relations possibility. You should also determine your audience, unless you are very specialized, and define your objective in advance. Remember also, museums should use documents in interpretation, not simply in research. This should be an integrated part of each exhibit or interpretive program. The possibility of collaboration with archives and libraries, with art collections, should be exhausted before one decides how much explanatory letterpress it must provide itself. And I would add another caution. History is an integrated combination of many things. For example, there is a running assumption that science or art and history are somehow split apart. But the great scientists of the past 4 or 5 centuries were often moral philosophers as well. Galileo, Newton, Darwin, Einstein, to name but a few. Music, art, and mathematics are constantly woven through our lives. The nature of objects, the materials they are made from, are testimony to the unity of technology and history. How do you separate a Henry Ford's impact on technology from his impact on the social life of his community? Remember the basic questions about the artifact. What does it mean, and what are all its possibilities? This question becomes the basis of interpretation. History museums depend upon all the artifacts of our lives. They are not art museums. There is a process to all this, and I would like to review it. First of all, the study phase. This is your initial research or data collection. Here you acquire all the pertinent data, the documents, the literature, the history, the relative and competitive solution of others, the review of collections, and so on. And here you need a preliminary approval from the director. Second, your statement of goals. This is the development of a clear statement regarding the priorities, purposes, objectives, limitations, and constraints. This may include the drawing up of a set of questions that need to be answered precisely or by estimation. And this is where you separate the wheat from the chaff, where you find out whether you can interpret something internally or whether you go to a square of a different type, say audiovisual interpretation or nothing at all. Third, we have the thematic development. This is a written preliminary description of the subject matter of the exhibit based on information from the steps above. Here you need to develop a general theme and prepare a script. A script is a narrative which will have, first of all, a preliminary statement. In other words, what is the purpose of the exhibition or theme, plus a brief description of the subject material and its viewpoint. Second, it will have a running description of the exhibit area, unit by unit. A unit being the single exhibit of the lowest common denominator in size, in story. It may be a complete period room, vitamins, or a railroad car. And this should also include a brief statement of the purpose of that unit in advancing the story or theme. And secondly, object or objects which will be displayed in the unit, listed where practical, and include the exact measurement. When the object is not in the museum, note the number, nature, weight, and dimensions of things in order to plan storage. And specify the type of presentation of unit. For example, will it be cases with shelves, objects in wall panels, built-ins, or what? Now, not each exhibit script will be this detailed. After this, we face a preliminary space plan and presentation and consultation. This is where the director is involved in the final yay or nay. This is the report on stated goals, the basic theme and floor plan, often the preliminary budget and time estimate. And upon approval of this scheme, as presented or modified, a proposal is usually presented for the subsequent work. In other words, what will be done, how it will be done, by whom it will be done, how long it will take, and how much it will cost in fees and expenses. And before you curl your lips and say, well, there's only me and some volunteers, I want to note that it makes no difference. The process is the same. Even if all the details may not be there, you must plan and think things through irregardless of staff size. The staff size and budget and facility and collections will affect all of this and, of course, determine the final result. But you must follow a plan, so give yourself time to think. Now, after this comes the design phase, the design and production phase, and the construction phase. These we will not go into, only repeat that this process will be tailored to the particular job. But again, I want to emphasize that you must have a plan. Now, historic structure museums undertake to recreate an environment. And thus, the emphasis is on the environment rather than on the individual specimens. And so this creates special problems of interpretation. There are the physical problems of the structure, as well as the standards of accuracy and care and restoration in refurnishing and so on. And so your interpretive exhibit plan or furnishing plan for a historic structure sets the parameters for what artifacts will help you tell your story. The plan or script specifies what objects will be displayed, and as with an object exhibit, you create a wish list for further acquisitions. In deciding what to interpret with a historic building, most people automatically consider furnishing it. Well, this is a very costly process, and it should not be undertaken as lightly as it often is. The National Park Service poses questions for historic houses which are well worth asking. In this case, deciding to interpret requires a yes to each of these questions. First, will the building and its furnishings preserve an important primary or secondary resource? Second, is furnishing the best way to communicate the meaning of this structure? Third, can the building be furnished accurately? Fourth, can visitors see and enjoy the furnished space under practical operating conditions? Fifth, is your decision cost effective? I'll be sure and ask these questions at each successive planning stage. What does furnishing your home do for interpretation? Does it call attention to the situation in which the house and its rooms played a part? Does it stimulate interest in it and add reality and fill in background? Or does it simply satisfy someone's idea of filling an empty room? A furnished house and a furnished room should provide accurate feelings linked to the subject. And it should leave impressions of the subject, of the time, and so on. Your visitor will come away with false impressions if you do not carefully plan. Ask yourself, are you being idealistic or realistic in your interpretation? Are you creating something that never was and that exists only in the figment of a person's imagination? Your interpretive plan and the furnishings need to focus on specific objectives in the home. What facts, insights, feelings, and impressions should the refurnished structure communicate to visitors? Some homes interpret the everyday life of average people, some character or period, others the setting of a single person. Everything you do in and around that house will leave an interpretive feeling, from the signs to the guides to the individual pieces. Deciding to interpret a historic home means thinking beforehand how the structure will be used, who can use it, and when. Each furnished historic structure should interpret certain things which must be based on solid research. Don't furnish because you can think of nothing else. The National Park Service suggests any furnishing plan should fulfill 3 conditions. First of all, they should be important in themselves. In other words, ideas worth communicating. Secondly, they must permit the furnishings to be selected and arranged in accordance with historical evidence. Third, they must also find expression by means of fully furnished rooms. And remember, furnishing is not the only way to interpret a historic home. The emphasis may be on the person who lived in the house, an event that occurred there, or the way of life it represents. A house need not be fully furnished. Do not freeze a piece of the past as it never was. How many times will your visitor wish to see something that has ceased to live? As you are involved in the process of considering what to interpret, remember that you will have some type of end product. And that end product should be considered an experiential system. The more a visitor or viewer can experience, the more rewarding it will be. Keep in mind that museums compete with other kinds of attractions like movies, television, cultural activities for a visitor's limited time. Your decision to interpret must be based on artifacts, on your collections, including documents, and on solid planning.